Tensions remain high on the border between Morocco and the Spanish territory of Ceuta. Over the weekend, Morocco's police clashed with migrants trying to breach the border fence. Hundreds were stopped from entering the territory. The exclave is located across the Gibraltar Strait from Spain's mainland. It has been a major entry point for many migrants trying to get into the European Union. From there, DW's Jan-Philipp Schultz sent this report.
Every day, the line in front of Ceuta's biggest soup kitchen gets longer. Nihed and her colleagues prepare several hundred free meals here. Almost all their guests are migrants from the Maghreb.
You notice it everywhere. For the past few months, masses of people have been crossing the border. There has always been a lot to do here, but currently it is more than ever.
Hundreds of migrants have arrived in this small Spanish exclave in recent weeks. They swim for up to 8 hours from Morocco, taking advantage of the warm weather and the cover provided by the nighttime fog to make the illegal border crossing. Nabil also arrived recently. The Algerian tells us that since getting here, he spent every night outdoors. He sustained a few injuries while crossing the border, but he can't get seen at a clinic or get a place at one of the official migration centers because they're full.
I've been sleeping out here for 5 nights. It's full of insects and it's very cold. There are also some guys who steal your belongings. You're tired all the time, but you can't fall asleep.
The situation is even worse for underage migrants. Temporary shelters have been set up in old garages, but they're housing 5 times as many minors as planned. Journalists are not allowed access, and Ceuta's local government is not prepared to be interviewed. The residents of Ceuta are torn between empathy for the migrants and the fear that their small town is being overwhelmed.
We need migration that is regulated, but at the same time humane. And when we take people in, we have to make sure that their basic needs are met.
I'm on the side of these poor guys, of course. Laws must be observed, period. If not, the whole of Africa will come to Europe in the future.
But many say the laws are not working. After a few weeks, the authorities in Ceuta simply issue many migrants with a document that allows them to take the next ferry to the Spanish mainland. Nabil says that he hopes he'll also get one.
I have family in France, Sweden, Switzerland, also in Germany. I know how to fix cell phones. Maybe I can get a job doing something like that.
Nabil hears that the climate for irregular migrants in Europe is getting tougher, but he's still convinced that his future lies on the other side of the sea.
And DW's Jack Parrick joins us from Brussels. How involved has the EU been in trying to support local authorities?
Well, this is a real headache for the European Union and the institutions here in Brussels. The situation in Ceuta has been going on for many, many years, well over a decade now, where people have been trying to get those papers in that Spanish enclave in order to then be transferred into the rest of the European Union. And it's really emblematic of the situation that the EU faces, the sort of balloon where if migration closes in one area, it sort of balloons out into another, and we're seeing that happen at the moment in that Spanish enclave. Now, back in March of 2023, the EU set up an agreement with Morocco to the tune of over 600 million euros in order to support the Moroccan economy and to bolster their ability to prevent the illegal migration into the enclave. It's not massively been seen to have worked, and obviously the situations we've seen over the last few days and the last weeks have proved that it's perhaps not working as well as the EU authorities would have hoped it would have. The EU Commissioner, Margarita Schinas, who's in charge of these kind of issues, he was on a Spanish radio station a couple of weeks ago and said that they won't be intimidated by these waves of migration, that they will continue to make sure that Ceuta and the Spanish authorities are supported by the EU to prevent illegal migration.
Many EU countries have been taking a harder line on migration, Germany included, most recently. Would you say the tide is turning?
Yeah, this is really the big question, and this is one of the issues that the EU is facing at the moment. We've seen, as you say, Germany has put up its internal land borders again. A number of other countries are considering doing the same. Sweden, we saw the Dutch government last week announce what it called, it's a hardline government that's propped up by a far-right party. They announced that they would bring in the most harsh asylum policies that Europe's ever seen. That's what they promised, including ending family reunifications for adult children if a parent is granted asylum in the Netherlands. That's what they plan to do. And they say that they want opt-outs from the EU scheme to share the burden of migration around the bloc. So instead of the people that arrive predominantly in Italy, Spain and Greece staying in those countries to be processed for asylum, instead they would be moved into other countries. But it looks like, I mean, hard to say whether the tide's turning, but there's certainly a different public rhetoric around migration that seems to have arisen in the last couple of weeks even.
And we've seen a new EU leadership team announced. How might that change the bloc's approach to migration?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. Just in the last, well, yesterday, we saw a huge new commission announced. The new commissioner for migration is from the Austrian People's Party, from Austria, Magnus Brunner. Quite hard line against migration. He may try to readapt some of the EU laws that were agreed earlier this year, in order to overhaul the migration system, which stipulates that the first place a person arrives has to be the place where they apply for asylum. There's a lot of questions about whether that law will be able to stand in the next 5 years of the EU mandate. And with a migration commissioner from a party which is quite hardline against migration, there may be pressures against that. There will also be pressures from the other national governments. As we say, we've seen the rhetoric change.
DW's Jack Parrick with The View from Brussels.